Get started. Are there any questions? Anybody got any questions or thoughts before we get started? Anything that they're working on that might need some help on? We're going to give everybody a few minutes to get logged in because it always, you know, as real estate agents, we like to be late for everything. I told Linda, I said, I'm going to be late for my own funeral. You watch.
And ladies, I've just dropped in the chat the link to the handout that Charles will be using today.
Great. And this is updated. So if you've downloaded it before, it's now updated. And it will probably get updated again before we teach the next class. This is part one. We're going to go over the 1 to 4, the amendment, homeowner association document, and third party, I think, are what today we're going to go over. And it is a solid 2 hours. So if we need to take a break, I'm all in. Just let me know. Had an agent come to me the other day and say that they were working intermediary without appointments. Yay, first one, yay. Except it was an investor buying it and the buyer had put in the buyer line or assigns. And so she calls me, she said, my buyer assigned it to somebody else. And I went, okay, do you know who they are? No. Have you talked to them? No. You know how to reach them? No. I said, you have representation with that person. You need to find out. Well, she called me like 2 or 3 days later after that. I never did find out who the first assignee was. And that assignee assigned it to somebody else. I said, so what you have is a cesspool of litigation if something goes wrong. And you need to not do that. I would highly recommend not doing it unless you have an attorney draw some kind of a document next time that talks about stipulations for the assignee, that they will be represented and have full documentation. So fortunately, the buyer wants to buy and the seller wants to sell. And because of that, it went to the closing table this morning. It's not when things close that things go really bad. It's 2 years later when you get served those papers that say you're being served and you need to show up. Those 5 words you never want to hear are, will the defendant please rise? And on the average across the United States. So we're just talking about averages. I hate percentages, but let's just talk for a minute. I like real numbers. So give me a number. But the real number is every 7 years, a real estate agent in their career will be served. That's the average. I've never been served. Don't plan on being served. I found that if you communicate very well across the board, that the likelihood of being served is greatly reduced. Anyhow, so just be careful out there and realize that there's 4 things you have to protect in a transaction, and they're your fiduciary to your client, yourself legally, your broker legally, and then the integrity of the contract. That includes your documents of listing or buyer rep. You got to protect that integrity. And so if you do that, that'll keep you way away from trouble. Any questions before we get rolling here? There's only a couple of us in the room, so this is going to be like a one-on-one. So if you have any questions and you want to open your mics, that's great. I will be here for them. If you want to type something in the chat, then Shelby will let us know. Okay. All right.
And Charles, I am going to send out another blast.
Okay.
Wake people up this morning.
Yeah, that'll be great. So there are a lot of changes. Have you written an offer on the new contract forms yet? Have either of you? Okay, you haven't. Make sure you use them. I had somebody send me an offer the other day from an investor on one of their listings, and it was written on the old contract form. And then they had put this 1-page long addenda together that was very similar to a foreclosure override or a relocation override, but you could tell it wasn't written by an attorney because there were several gaps that were left in it. And I told them I would not be accepting this written the way it is. You know, if they're willing to remove that addenda from the contract, then that might be a good contract to execute. But when people and a principal in the transaction can write whatever they want, but when it's full of holes, then, and I can't give legal advice and neither can you. So I told her, so now what's going to have to happen is your seller client is going to need an attorney to explain this document to him because you can't. It was a 1-page long deal that it will override the contract where legal, and that it was all about punishing the seller should something go wrong. Nothing to offset that, and where the buyer would be having to release earnest money. In fact, it's stated that the earnest money and the option fee, no matter what, would go back to the buyer. Well, you can't do that. That conflicts with the contract. And so what you would have to do, and I'm not an attorney and can't practice legal advice, is remove the provision in the 1-to-4 contract, and then you can say that it would be returned back to the buyer. But you just can't write that a conflict in the contract like that. Stay away from special provisions. TREC does not want us there. All right. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to jump into it. Can everybody see the screen? All right. This is part 1. And yeah, I've got to make it that big. Is it filled up your screen? Are you good with that? All right. As I mentioned, 1-to-4, third party, addendum subject to mandatory membership in an owners association, addendum concerning right to terminate due to lender's appraisal, and then the amendment. We're going to talk about all those today. Now, paragraph 7 of the contract has major changes in it. It talks about on the invoices from the contractor that does the work, that it must show the scope of work. So you might want to write this down because we're not going to have time to really do a lot of coverage on this today. I do mention it in the class, but scope of work means the concern or complaint is going to be item number 1. Item number 2 is the cause. So what caused the concern or the complaint? And then item number 3 is the corrective action that the contractor took. And so complaint or concern, cause, and correction are going to have to be documented on invoices. And that's required by the contract. I can tell you that paragraph 12 is going to be your friend in letting the seller give the buyer money towards their closing costs to offset repairs that might need to be made.
Good question. What paragraph did you say that scope of work was?
I'm sorry?
What paragraph were you referring to on the scope
Paragraph
of work?
7 talks about
Okay.
property condition. And I think it's 7D is what talks about scope of work.
Okay.
And then part 2, I'm going to teach part 2, and I forget what day that's going to be, just for your guys' benefit. Linda and I are going on vacation. We kind of do that once a year, and that's usually the time that I have off. So we're going to take about 10 days. We're going to be leaving. I'll be off the grid Sunday for sure. And then I won't be back on the grid until the 22nd, which I think is a Wednesday of February. So if you have contract questions, you need to go to whoever your contract person is in your office. All right. Now, this is for newer agents, this is a timeline sheet of the contract. The reason for this is we're in a specific performance contract. The newer agents that have coaching, which is a great thing, they still don't understand the specific performance timeline. So if you execute a contract and I'm your contract coach, I need you to send me that contract executed, and I'm going to fill out this sheet for you, and then I'm going to send it back to you so you can actually put it in your calendar so that you can put your dates in the calendar. Actually had a new agent call me a couple of months ago. Do the weekends count towards option days? And I went, yeah. Where did you learn anything but that? So anyhow, so that's why I want to make sure that your timeline is met. Can you imagine the problem that agent would have had he thought the option period was 2 days more? And then the next thing you know, his client's in default of the contract, or not in default, but will not get no repairs because they failed to negotiate them during the option period. And this property did not have an HOA, so they couldn't fall back on that.
I think
it's a mess.
As a new realtor, that's what's confusing for me. Some things include the weekends and some things don't. So getting all that straight is
right.
confusing.
So this is what we're going to go through today. So the scope of today's class is to teach you how to fill out the contract. We're not going to go too much in depth about the language in the contract because That's a 4.5-hour class, and all we have right now is 2 hours. Okay, so let's look at page 1 of the new contract. Mandatory, this came out 11/7/2022. Mandatory use February 1st. So anything you write from here forward, it's got to be on this form until they change it again, which they will. And notice, just for grins, that it says not for use with condominium transactions. I still today see agents writing up condominiums on this form, and it's just not right. The parties to this contract are the seller and the buyer. Now, if you look at one of my listings, you're going to see that I have a offer instruction sheet, and you're going to find that the sellers are named on that sheet. However, my second favorite place to go to is the tax roll if I can't reach the agent. And then when I've got a buyer that's serious about a property, people say, well, how long does it take you to write an offer? Like they're looking for speed, not quality. And it takes me sometimes 3 or 4 hours to write an offer. Not that it takes me that long to fill in the blanks, but it takes me that long to do the research and make sure that I've got my buyer lined up with the proper documentation so that when we send our offer over, the lender has been discovered. They have gone through underwriting. They've had fraud guard done. Fraud guard means that the title company, the lender is looking for money laundering, foreclosures, drug money, that kind of thing. And so if the lender hasn't run them through fraud guard, then that could be a stopper at the end of the transaction. So then your client would be in default because they have so many days usually to get qualified, right? So that's qualifying the buyer, not the property. Third party, you have to qualify 2 things, the buyer and the property. 2 things have to qualify in third party. So getting the buyer qualified before we ever go to making an offer is what I do. That means they've been through underwriting, they've run fraud guard, everything is good to go. They might need to refresh the file depending on how long it takes to find a property they want. Or refreshing the file means new bank statements and anything and a new credit pull. And that's something else. That's another conversation. I know I'm chasing a rabbit here, but this is important. Make sure that your client knows not to change their job, not to go out and fill out any more credit applications. They might be able to afford that new Mercedes. It may be well within the scope, but what happens is when you execute a contract, they take a snapshot of your credit profile. When they get ready to close your transaction, they go back in and take another snapshot. If they don't match, then the file has to go back to underwriting, and that's 48 hours minimum. So you let them know, look, is there anything that you need to buy or anything credit forms that you're going to fill out? We want to make sure you don't change jobs, lose your job, or go change your credit profile. That we can't do. All right. So anyhow, so back to this, make sure your buyer's ready. And the seller is, if it's my listing, then you're going to find it on the offer instructions and MLS, you're going to find the name of the buyer, the sellers that you want to add to the contract at the top line there. Make sure that you also add the middle initial of your buyers if they have one. The reason being is like Nguyen, W-E-G-Y-N in Vietnamese is a very common name like Smith is in the United States. And I had a client with the last name of Nguyen, and they, without a middle initial, which they did not have, their name threw up a red flag at the title company. And so we had to prove that that person wasn't the person that had done a lot of evil things. So if you go Jim Smith, make sure you put Jim's middle initial in there if they have one, because that narrows down the scope of possible people that it could be. And so you've got to name the people on the contract correctly. Also, in estate work, which I do a lot of, you don't put the estate of John Smith. It's got to be Jill Smith for the estate of John Smith, because John Smith estate can't sign documents. He's passed away and he can't sign anything. So even though it's his estate, it's got to be somebody signing for him. So make sure that you have somebody in. I had a contract I reviewed this morning that's been through an attorney's office and it was incorrect at the top. They put the estate of so-and-so. I said, well, who's signing for the estate? And there were 4 people. So I said, you need to draw an amendment that adds those 4 people to line 1. to the parties of the contract. Okay, everybody good with that? Any questions there? Gets kind of confusing. Okay. Property, land improvements, accessory are collectively referred to as the property. Okay, so your lot and your block, typically we do most of that. Most of our transactions are done that way. If you get out in the country and you're working on land, you're going to probably have an attachment that gives a geographical location of the property. All right, addition, city of, county of, Texas known as, and then that would be the address of the property down at the bottom. So you have your lot, your block, what subdivision. So like Wheeler Ridge subdivision of the city of Denton, county of whatever county it's in, and then the physical address right here. Now, I'm kind of picky about my contracts. So not only do I put the address 123 Main Street, zip code 77096-5424. I go ahead and add the 4. It just adds professionalism to the contract. So improvements, permanently installed and built-in items. That includes solar panels, and we'll get on that soapbox in the second class, but that includes anything, any fixtures that are attached to the property. And so you want to make sure that everything is, if my seller wants to exclude something, I want them to take it down before we list and put it in a box and put it someplace, because it's like kids fighting over toys. As soon as you tell a buyer they can't have the sound system in the media room, what is it they want? The sound system in the media room. I've had it happen. And I've watched the seller actually pack up the sound system in the moving truck that they had rented, that they were driving back to Missouri on. And then the buyer does their final walkthrough and says, "Where's the sound system?" And they said, "We're not closing until I get it back." So I called him up and I said, "You need to," and the bracket for the TV he took off the wall. I said, "You need to turn that truck around and you need to bring back the sound system and the bracket for the TV." Okay. Anyhow, so make sure that if something's going to be excluded, it's taken away from the property. I had somebody exclude a light fixture because mom gave them a light over the kitchen table. I actually had somebody exclude a rose bush in the backyard. Apparently it was a family thing for when the children were born, they planted a rose bush for the first kid and the second kid. And so we put in the contract that they would remove the rose bushes and replace it with, proper soil and sod. And they did a great job on it. And it was done very well. So you'll never know what somebody wants to buy. I found that there are no two transactions alike ever. Everybody's got their own nuances. So installed and built-in items, any equipment, appliances, valances, screens. So this does include curtains, carpeting, mirrors. Oh, mirrors? Well, they're on a hook. Those are not permanent. It says right there, mirrors. I'm not going to argue with the contract. So those brand new mirrors, they took down that big ugly mirror that got so unpopular and they went ahead and hung individual mirrors up over the sinks. It says right there, mirrors stay. Oh, but they're hung on a hook. Who wants to have that argument? So have that discussion before you list. Accessories. Here's another major problem. Following describe related accessories, if any, air conditioning units. So that would be window units too. It says, that's what it says, window units. Stove, fireplace, screens, a screen even. So if you go through the house, it's got this gorgeous fireplace screen, which I had one that was in the shape of a peacock. It had a kind of a statue of a peacock, and then the screen actually folded out in this gorgeous screen. I said, we need to take that out of the picture. Oh, it looks so nice. I said, are you leaving it? No. I said, well, let's take it out of the picture because they're going to want it. Okay, fireplace screens, curtains, rods, blinds, windows, shades, draperies, and all that, and on and on and on. Entry gates. I had somebody actually take entry gates off a house one time. I told my buyer, call the police. They stole it because they weren't supposed to take it, and they did. Next thing you know, the listing agent's calling me. We'll bring them right back. I said, I know you will. For improvements and accessories, controls, including seller's transferable rights to the software applications used to access and control improvements or accessories. Hardware used solely to control improvements or accessories. So one year I bought my wife a cute little Google thing, and I thought, oh, it's on sale. That's great. Well, that cute little Google thing that controls everything in our house. Little did I know I was going to spend $3,000 rewiring my house for switches that turn on lights and raise the garage door and turn on the sprinkler system and this and that and the other thing. So my house It is more electronic than some of the $1 million houses are selling right now. Because we've got everything. You can turn on the lights and cameras inside and outside. Why do you have inside cameras? Because I have 2 dogs and I have to watch them. Okay, so I've got inside cameras. That brings up this subject. Make sure your clients know when you're showing them houses that there's probably cameras inside and they're probably on and they're watching you. So do not throw yourself on the living room floor and kick your feet in the air and scream that you have to have it, because what you've done is destroy your leverage on negotiation. We know she wants it. Look at her. Hey, they want it. Look at what, man, they're dancing on the carpet right there. And I tell them, if we're going to have price concerns, if you don't like it, just speak up. Fine. But if you like it and you think this is the one that you want, then let's talk about it outside, because you're probably on camera and audio. Okay. So getting back to our Google stuff. They're not going to get my Google. I'll buy them a new Google head or whatever they call that, control center, but they're not going to get mine because it's got a lot of personal information on it. So what else? All my cell phones, my iPads, my 4 computers, they all control everything at the house. They're not going to get those either. So I make sure that we take all that software off of there, because that new person buying that house needs to be able to get in and set that stuff up on their own. Okay. So I will give them a new Google head. I'll take the old one with me because it's been listening to me for years. It's got a lot of personal information. Have you ever noticed how you can talk in your house about, I wonder what it would be like to stay at the Sheraton in New York City. And the next thing you know, you open up your Google and there's a coupon for the Sheraton in New York City. Huh? No, they're not listening. Oh, yes, they are. So careful what you say, right? So anyhow, I make sure we had actually a creeper recently. I love what you've done with they emailed the buyer. Love what you've done with the living room furniture. It looks great. Hey, the pool furniture, love it. It's looking good. They had access to the cameras. Oh, so make sure that what I do, what I tell my clients to do, and we've sold several houses this way that had electronic everything. Go ahead and dumb down your passwords from your big long 26-digit passwords. Dumb them down to 1, 2, 3 ABC and the address or something. And that way, whoever buys your house will be able to go in and use the simple password, gain access to everything, and change their passwords and change access. All right, exclusions. So if there's any exclusions to be had, make sure that they're written here. So as a buyer's agent or as a listing agent, if there is a shed in the backyard and that shed is on pavers, it is not real estate. If it's on a concrete slab, it is real estate. So you need to find out from the seller if it's going to stay or not. We actually had it where the shed disappeared the night before closing. Wow. And it was a tough shed and it was expensive. And the buyer was expecting the tough shed and it wasn't there anymore on the final walkthrough. It did create a big stink, but it was on pavers. It wasn't on concrete. So whenever I'm showing or whenever I'm writing an offer or taking a listing, I want to know, are you taking the shed with you? Yes or no? And then I put in also in the offer instructions that the shed's going to stay, that it's not real estate. And if you want it, you need a non-realty item addendum. Okay. All right. Reservations for oil and gas and other minerals, water, timber, or other interest made in accordance with the attached addendum. So there is an addendum for separating your minerals and your rights for timber and crops and water and so forth. Cash portion, the sale price payable by buyer at closing. So make sure you put your cash amount in there. So this is new. This is the new contract right here. The term cash portion of sales price does not include proceeds from borrowing any kind of seller or selling other real property except for as disclosed in this contract. What we were having is investors saying it's a cash offer, and then they had to get a hard money loan. So the contract wasn't quite honest. It was cash to the buyer, but so was a mortgage. When it's come time for closing, it's cash to cash to the seller because they get paid in cash, but it still was borrowed money. So that's why they included this. And that's why on the new third-party addendum, there's a spot for other kinds of lending, hard money loans.
So may I ask, so is that the down payment?
No. That would be.
I guess I'm still confused by it.
What we're saying is you're going to check this box right here for third party. Okay. So if that investor is going to get a hard money loan, and they say it's going to be cash here and then nothing financed here, and then there's a total amount here, which would equal the cash amount, that is not a good contract. Are you going to get are you doing 100% financing on this hard money loan? No, I'm putting down 50%. So then you would put 50% of the sale price here. You'd put the other 50% here to equal your total cash sale. Your total sale price. Okay, are you good, Tanya, or is that still raised a question?
Sort of.
Okay, so.
I got a question.
I
for
mean,
you, Charles.
it's not the down payment.
No, it's going to affect the down payment, but it's not the total down payment. If you see one that says total, that it's going to be a cash sale, they need to have cash. They're not getting any kind of mortgage or loan or investor loan, hard money loan, any kind of loan. Okay. Yeah, it's cash. I'm going to get a hard money loan. Well, that's not cash. That's a hard money loan. And so now the contract actually allows for that. Before it did not. Okay. And there was another question there. Is that?
Yeah,
Dylan?
if you were using a company like Homeward that actually buys the home in cash for the client, would that go in that 3A?
Yes, because Homeward's buying the property.
Okay.
When you're using Homeward, which is a good program, by the way, if you need a stair step to get somebody into a property, that's not a bad deal at all. I think it's only like 3 or 4% of the sale price. And you can't go get a bridge loan for that kind of money. So I would say that Homeward would be a good opportunity, especially if you go with their lender and that makes everything nice and tight and everything closes on time. So there's a kudos for Homeward. Some of all financing attached. So there would be the third party loan assumption addendum. We're going to start seeing some of those because all the FHA and VA loans are assumable, right? And in this market where there's 3% interest, people are going to want that interest, but they're going to have to come to the table with a heavy down payment because they're going to need to, if they're going to assume that loan, they may have to get a second loan to make up the equity difference that the seller has in the property, right? Does that help you? Or did I just go, everybody's confused? So there's going to be, so somebody has a lower interest rate loan that's assumable, maybe 3%. So let's just use simple numbers. So let's say the property they bought at $200,000 is now worth $300,000. But you're just going to assume that mortgage, which maybe they paid on for 5 years. And now the loan balance is, instead of $200,000, let's say the loan balance is 150, but the property's worth 300. So that buyer needs to come to the table with $150,000 cash to assume that loan. Did that help explain it? Okay, everybody's shaking their head. Good stuff. All right, or seller financing. Warning, danger, make sure an attorney's with you on this one. Seller financing, we used to call it contract for deed, is not allowed. You can't write it up. Contract for deed means that I'll make payments until it's closed. Well, that's what they used to do, is the seller would hold the deed. And then 5 years, nobody lives anywhere for 30 years, hardly. My mother does, but that's one of the rare ones. But nobody does. So 5 years later, when they need to move, guess what? The seller would say, oh, thank you so much, but I'm so sorry. I mean, I'll let you out of the contract, but I'm not giving you any equity. That was contract for deed. So that's why they outlawed it in Texas. I say outlawed it. They made it to where real estate agents can't write it up. Only attorneys can. So contract for deed is out. Seller financing is still a doable deal. I had a guy that has a property down south of Dallas, 15 acres, nice little house that he rehabbed. And he said, I want to do seller financing. Why? Because the stock market's not paying anything and my money's not doing any good. And I really don't want the property anymore, but I wouldn't mind making 8% on that. 8%, that's high. Well, somebody that can't finance for a conventional loan or an FHA or VA, if they can't qualify or don't qualify because they're not a vet or they have horrible credit or whatever, but they can prove they can make the payments. Maybe there's a lawsuit judgment against them, whatever. And then so the seller can go ahead and finance to somebody that normally couldn't get financed. But the seller has to approve it. Okay, seller financing. Sale price, sum of A and B. So that's A and that's B and that's your sale price. Leases, except for as disclosed in this contract, seller is not aware of any leases affecting the property after the effective date of the contract. Seller will not, without buyer's written consent, create a new lease, amend an existing lease, or convey any interest in the property. Check all applicable boxes. one of the nightmares that I had when the Barnett Shale was a big deal out here in west of I-35E was a guy that sold, they came around knocking on the door and said, sign here, we'll give you a check for $700 for the rights to your lot. And he sold a lease while we were under contract. I had to have an attorney straighten that out. Okay, so don't sign anything. Residential leases. The residential lease survives the sale, so whoever's living in that property has the right to continue in that lease. Fixture leases, solar panels, my favorite bane of my existence. Water softeners, alarm systems, or just anything that could be. So when I take a listing, I find out, do you have anything on the property that you're making payments on or leased? You need to find out. Natural resource leases. So that would be your mineral rights. Okay, so that addendum would be added. Seller has delivered to buyer a copy of all natural resource leases. So that would be a lease that the seller is a party of. However, 3 sellers ago, somebody signed a mineral lease for gas or whatever, 3 sellers ago, and they severed the mineral rights 3 sellers ago. Well, that current owner may not even know about that. So they can't disclose what they don't know. So if somebody wants to find out if there's a mineral lease on that property, you have to hire a landman. Get ready, $3,000 to $5,000 to find out who owns the minerals on a property. The way it is. That question doesn't come up very often anymore. Seller has not delivered to buyer a copy of the natural resource leases. Seller shall, and why did I highlight it with yellow? Everywhere in the contract where it says shall, that is a command in the contract that must be fulfilled on the number of days required to fulfill that command. And if not, so the seller shall provide to buyer a copy of the natural resource leases within 3 days after the effective date. Okay, so that would be time is of the essence. So the effective date is today, which is the 7th. Then they have until 11:59 p.m. on the 10th to deliver any natural resource leases. If the seller fails to do so, the seller is in default of the contract. And this holds true all the way through the contract. Wherever it says seller shall and seller fails to meet that commitment, then the seller is in default. Can everybody shake their head? I get that. Because then what happens is the buyer can terminate the contract at the closing table. I changed my mind. I'm terminating the contract. You defaulted 25 days ago. There's no timeline for when the other party has to give default notice. Okay, I'm terminating because you defaulted. Does that kind of help you understand how important this contract class is and understanding the contract? Seller shall, let's see, effective date. Buyer may terminate the contract within how many days after the buyer receives the natural resource leases? I like to give somebody about 5 to 7 days. The reason being is sometimes it takes a little while to resource that information. So I want to have 5 to 7 days. Earnest money and termination option. Delivery of earnest money and option fee within 3 days of the effective date. Buyer must deliver. Notice it doesn't say shall, but must deliver too. So strong suggestion, but not shall. 2, and then the escrow agent. The escrow agent is the name of the title company. It is not Sally Jones, the escrow officer. So don't put Sally Jones in there. That is the escrow officer, not the escrow agent. And then and what I see a lot here is an email address. No, it's supposed to be the address of said title company. Okay, so make sure the address of the title company is there. It even says address. And then how much in earnest money and so much money as option fee. The earnest money and option fee shall be made payable to escrow agents. So last summer, and I'm just going to talk last summer for a minute, when the market was so hot and people were writing offers, 8, 9 offers, and still couldn't get one bought. I say that attributes to the skill of the agent of not knowing how to make that contract work. So that's why I'm glad I'm here to help you with this. But they were saying no option period. We don't want an option period. All right, so I'm going to fast forward 2 years from that. And here they are on the witness stand going, I wanted that house, but I really wanted to have it inspected. But my agent told me that we couldn't have an option period to inspect the house because the market was too hot. Can you see that happening? Buyer's remorse. I can see it happening big time. So every offer that I took on my listings that said no option period, we made sure they had an option period. We made sure they had enough days to get an inspection, and we made sure that they were going to have an inspection. Seller's disclosure was filled out properly. It wasn't one of those, everything's perfect. Everything's perfect. No, it wasn't. My seller's disclosures are not, for my sellers are not perfect. I went, okay, so you're liable for everything you didn't disclose on this document. Just want to make sure you know. If you disclose it now, you're not liable for it later on, 2 years down the road. And by the way, that's usually when most lawsuits happen over property condition items, is usually from 2 to 4 years. Okay, they don't even start the first year or the second year. So after 2 years, so it's like third year and fourth year. Earnest money shall be made payable to escrow agent and may be paid separately or in combination as a single payment. So let's say the option and earnest money is $3,500, $500 for the option fee and $3,000 for the earnest money. If you can find a $300,000 house. So let's say $5,000. So $5,500, and all they deliver is $500 to the title company. The option fee is going to be fulfilled first. And so now the buyer client is in default of the contract for not delivering enough earnest money. And when can the seller terminate the contract and keep all that earnest money? The day of closing, if they wanted to, because the buyer defaulted. So make sure that if you have a buyer, they understand what their obligations are. As soon as we execute, you've got to get that money to the title company. Now, the title companies are using a program called ZOCAM, where you take a picture of the check and you send it electronically to the title company through their program. And that instantly puts a timestamp on it. So it's not like you've got to run to the title office before 5 o'clock. So let's say it's 6 o'clock in the evening, you're still there because it's on the third day. Okay. Earnest money and option. Yes.
Can you give us some recommended time for the option period and amount?
Typically, we're at 1% in this market. Okay, typically, the option period, I'm sorry, that's earnest money. Option fee, if it's below 500, you might get away with a $400 option fee. I'm telling my buyers that want to be serious, and there might still be some competition out there in good areas because there's such a lack of inventory. I tell them $500 is a minimum. I can tell you down in Houston, $500 is almost not enough. They want to see some option fee up there for your contract to be accepted. Now I'm going to roll the clock back and tell you how old I am, and so tell you I can remember when $50 was acceptable for option fee if it was less than $1 million, and $100 was acceptable option fee if it was over $1 million. So those days are long gone. So $400 to $500, $600 would not be unusual. You want to get your contract executed, then get ready to pony up some option fee. All right. Did that help?
Yes, thank you.
Welcome. Buyer shall deliver additional earnest money of. Now, this is where I like to practice. This is where I like to have a contract that's in a power position. So what I will do is I'll tell my buyer, we want to go ahead and deposit another $4,000 or $5,000 of earnest money after we've done inspections and negotiated all repairs. So usually I'll put here 15 days after the execution date, my buyer shall deliver another amount of earnest money. Now, when you compare contract to contract and everybody else put double zeros there or triple zeros there, whose contract's stronger? Mine is. So that's why I put additional earnest money. It's not a bad thing. If your buyer is committed to the property and they know they want to move forward, then go ahead and put some additional earnest money down. Not a bad thing at all. All right, so notice we went paragraph shall. So it says escrow agent receives under this shall be applied first to the option fee and then to the earnest money and then the additional earnest money. Okay. Do not fail to deliver on time. So if you execute the contract on Thursday, that's day 0. Execution day is always day 0. Friday's day 1, Saturday's day 2, Sunday's day 3, but the title company's not open on Sunday, right? You can still ZOCAM them on Sunday, but the obligation is to make sure you have it delivered by Monday. End of business Monday, unless Monday's a holiday, which does happen. right? So then you have to deliver by end of business on Tuesday. Now, this question came up at the last class. What if it is a substitute holiday? There's no provision for that. So like a holiday came up on Sunday, and so they made the substitute holiday Monday, the last holiday that we had. And guess what? There's no provision for that. So get the option and earnest money in the, I like it the next day, okay? And just have them Zocam it. That makes things so much easier. Termination option for nominal consideration, receipt of seller acknowledged the buyer's agreement to pay option fee within the time required. Seller grants buyer the unrestricted right to terminate this contract, even if it's they found another house they like, by giving notice of termination to seller within so many days. Right now, 5 to 7 days is about all you're going to get. If you're out in the country or you've got a bigger property, you got a $2 million property, and that's going to take a lot more inspection, you might get 10 days. Okay. And there's no reason you can't get inspections done in that time frame, at least with a number of inspectors that are qualified in my area. If you have an area where there's only 2 inspectors and there's 500 listings they need to go look at, well, you're going to need more days. All right. It says right here about release of the earnest money. The option fee will not be refunded, and the escrow agent shall release any option fee remaining with escrow agent to the seller. And that is without any further obligation for the seller and buyer to agree about where it gets sent. So if your buyer terminates the contract, the seller is going to automatically get the the option fee. And the earnest money should be returned if they terminated correctly in the contract, is going to go to the buyer if there was no defaults. Failure to timely deliver option fee if no dollar amount is stated in the option fee, or if buyer fails to deliver the option fee within the required time, buyer shall not have the unrestricted right to terminate this contract under paragraph 5. Title policy. Seller shall furnish, another command in the contract, issued by and who title company. They could say escrow agent, but title company is just fine. All right, here's something important. If your buyer is going to reuse that survey, or the seller provides a survey with a T47, I would be definitely checking the box. Will amended read in shortages in area at the expense of the buyer or the seller? I would say that my buyer wants to pay for that. That is an insurance policy to ensure the survey is good, that the boundary lines are not wrong. Had a call from a very experienced agent the other day. What happens when the neighbor puts a fence up 3 feet, encroach 3 feet into the other neighbor's property? I said, I'm guessing that verbal exchange and emails back and forth didn't fix the problem. She said, no, it didn't. I said, it's time for them to hire a real estate attorney and make sure the survey that they have is valid. Wow, does happen. So, by the way, the cost of that insurance policy, which is, that's what this is, it will be, shall be amended. It's an insurance policy, and it is 0.5% of the cost of the title policy. 0.5%. So like $300 or $400 to insure a survey that might cost you, a new one might cost you $1,200, depending on the size of the property and location. That's cheap. All right, seller shall furnish. No, it doesn't say title company shall furnish. It says that the seller shall furnish the title commitment. So as a listing agent, you need to stay on top of that. Typically a title commitment, if it's clear and clean, can be delivered within about 5-6 days. And typically that has to go to the, that needs to get delivered to the lender as well if there's a mortgage. And in today's world, the title companies do furnish it to the lender. So let me just let you take a note here. Whenever I execute a contract, I draw an email and it has all parties on it and all their contact information that I have. Meaning the lender, here's the lender, and here's their name, here's their phone number, here's their email, here's their company. Title company, same thing. This is so-and-so title, and here's the escrow agent, and here's her assistant, and these are their emails, and this is the phone numbers. And at the very top, in big red bold printing, I put, my contract manager is so-and-so. Make sure she's copied on all emails. all emails, underline, underscore. And then everybody knows who everybody is, and the title company loves that because now they don't have to try and figure out who the lender is. Okay. All right, so within so many days after the effective date, seller shall furnish buyer and title company seller's existing survey, depending on which box you check. If the seller fails to deliver the survey, and it says right here, to furnish the existing survey or affidavit within the prescribed time, buyer shall obtain a new survey at seller's expense no later than 3 days prior to closing. Guess what? It's still a default of the seller, and the buyer still has a right to terminate the contract. But in order for your buyer to stay within the guidelines of the contract, if they're going to wait till the closing day to terminate, they better have bought a surveyor. Guess what? Buyer is now out of compliance with the contract. They're also in default. Isn't that fun? Where both sides are now in default. Within so many days after the effective date, buyer shall obtain a new survey. Okay, so Arthur Survey used to be one of the biggest in Texas. They were great. You could get a survey in a metropolitan area in about 3 days max. Sometimes on a rush, we got them in 2 days. I've even had them delivered in 1 day. Okay, because they did so many surveys. Well, Arthur Survey Company left Texas because of the copyright laws. Notice that every survey used to have the word copyrighted on it. Well, we would reuse them anyway, even though they were copyrighted, and they didn't like that. So they pulled their company out of Texas and went somewhere else. So instead of 3 days to get a survey, it might take you 20. And if you're out in Mineral Wells, personal experience, it took them 30 days to get me a survey after promising one in 26. And it took that long to get a survey. So make sure you are cooked up with the title company and you know how long the survey company's taking to get a survey.
Is there like a general guideline of days here that you put in for these?
A general guideline for what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
For this section, is there like a general guideline for days, or do you?
No, usually that's why I say you stay connected with the title
Right.
company. Say, yeah,
Okay.
excuse me, we're getting surveys in 10 days. So I'm going to put 14 days. So that way there's a 4-day cushion in case it hits over a weekend. Okay.
Okay.
I try and cushion everything so that nobody's in default. And while we're talking, if you're not careful when you execute a contract, if it's not written properly, if somebody's in default the day of execution. So you got to be careful. Within so many days after the effective date, seller at seller's expense shall furnish a new survey to the buyer. I don't check that box very often, and here's why. The survey is guaranteed to who pays for it. So if the seller pays for it and the buyer buys it, does that survey have any more guarantee? No. So that would take you back to this page where you would say where you would say that the buyer's going to go ahead and buy the exception insurance. Okay. If the seller is going to provide a new survey, it's much better for my buyer to go ahead and pay for the survey because it's guaranteed to who pays for it. And then you don't need to buy the exception insurance, except I'll give it another benefit. Survey companies can go out of business or leave the state. And when they do, guess what? Their obligation to that survey may be dissolved or a lot more difficult to enforce. So therefore, that is another reason to buy the insurance policy. Okay. People just kind of overlook that paragraph. Okay, survey, we got it. Check the box. Well, how does that impact your client? Objections. Buyer may object in writing to defects and exclusion encumbrances to title. So this is right here where you're going to put the activity. So let's say the house has a big backyard and they want to put a pool in it. So this is where you would put, I want to put a pool in the backyard. So there's no reason I can't put a pool. And then you have to give in Schedule C is what you're going to want to read on the title commitment. And then how many days? So if you don't put a number of days here, then the buyer has the right to object right up until closing date. You don't want that. If your buyer wants to buy and your seller wants to sell, and you don't want there to be this hiccup on the day before closing. I can see the moving van is packed. The husband finally or wife finally or whoever finally reads the title commitment and says, whoa, wait a minute. I'm not sure about this. Right? And the next thing you know, they want to object the day before closing, and here you go, you got a problem. So I always put, I like to give them 5 to 7 days. 5 to 7 days on objections. And it says seller shall cure any timely objections if they can. However, the seller does not have to pay any money to cure an objection. If there's going to be a cost to it, then the contract will terminate and the buyer's going to get their earnest money back. Will they get back their option fee? No. Okay. And if the buyer doesn't wave their hand and say, I object to, right, and within the number of days, then it's deemed to they have waived their objection. However, that doesn't mean the mortgage company has waived their objection if there's going to be a mortgage. And so if they can't get clear title, the mortgage company's not going to approve the mortgage. And how long do they have to object? The title company the mortgage company 3 days before closing can pull the plug on the deal. But they have to write a letter stating why. Okay, just make sure you're clear on that. All right. Membership in a property owners association, is it or is it not? You need to do your homework. We're going to scroll on through here. Seller shall be attached to this contract. Public Improvement District, a PID. By the way, a PID is not a MUD. So make sure you know the difference. So right here, it says the following notices have been given or are attached to this contract. For example, MUD WCID, which is a different type of tax. It affects your taxes. It's kind of a PID, and then a PID notice. All right. There's a PID form that we have. I don't use it. I go to the title company and I say, okay, property XYZ is in a PID. I would like the document that the buyer and seller are going to sign at closing. And then I make it attached to and I will put see attached right here. So I make it a part of the contract after everybody has signed it, because it is a requirement that they sign that notification prior or at the time of execution. Now the contract says final execution. We may run into that while we're doing this contract class. We may not, because it's not a blank. But final execution, they used to teach that final execution was at the closing table, right up until people were looking at their closing documents. And for the first time, they decided to read their commitment and all the documentation. And they realize it's in a PID and it affects their tax, or it affects them, or it's in a MUD and it affects their taxes. And they go, oh, I didn't know this. I'm not signing this. They didn't give me notice until now. They have the right to walk away from the deal at the closing table, and it happened. So now we say that final execution of the contract is when we actually put the date on it, on the execution line. Property conditions, seller shall permit, there's a command, buyer and buyer's agents access to the property at reasonable times. Okay, so somebody said, well, my seller says it's not reasonable. I said, well, you need to go look at the law, and I'm not an attorney and I can't practice law, but the law says 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. 7 days a week, whether it's a holiday, whether it's a national holiday, whether it's somebody's personal birthday, whatever, that buyer still has access to the property. Now, I do say that you want to give notice and give permission. As a listing agent, I prepare my people. Look, as soon as we execute, this is before, this may be while we're working offers. It may be during the business plan. And then again, when we're working on the offers, remember, they're going to have inspections. They're going to want in the house probably the day after, and you have to let them in or you're in default. And we don't want that. So make sure you let them in. Well, I'm going to have to put my dog in the kennel. Yeah, you are. Well, I don't know. Well, yes, you need to know. So have that argument with your seller prior to executing a contract. You don't want to have it in the crunch of, okay, we're executed. Yay, champagne, here we go. And then, oh, I have to let them inspect. Oh, no, you don't want that question to come up. Seller's disclosure notice. Buyers receive the notice. That's whenever I take a listing, my seller's disclosure survey T47, foundation information, any other work that's material fact of the property is going to be in the folder. However, just because it's there does not mean it's delivered, and you must deliver the seller's disclosure. So whenever I have somebody that's serious about making an offer, I send them, even though I tell them there's access, I also send them that entire package The reason I do that is because I want them, if it's got foundation work and they're allergic to it, I want them to make that decision before we execute. If you're going to walk away, let's don't get contracted. I don't want to take that property off the market because you're going to turn around and terminate the contract because it had foundation work. Okay, so just, I get that stuff up front. Buyer has not received the notice. So within so many days, this is a very bad place for your seller to be. Because right now you're going to give them 7 days. And then guess what? They have another 7 days right here to terminate the contract for any reason if they have an option period. Or without the option period. In other words, if they haven't received the seller's disclosure, they don't need an option period to terminate the contract. So you've effectively given them a 14-day option period where they can terminate the contract because you didn't deliver the seller's disclosure prior to contract execution. Everybody good with that? How important it is to get that done. All right. Seller is not required to furnish the notice under the Texas Property Code. There are 2 schools of thought to this. I like to prescribe where you cannot over-disclose. You cannot over-disclose. And so if you have an estate that you're working on, oh, it's estate, so therefore the seller doesn't have to fill out a seller's disclosure. Well, there's argument there, and here's the argument. If the seller is also the executor of the estate, and they're going to receive benefit from the sale, i.e. money, or some other benefit from the sale, then they are also responsible to deliver material facts of the property as they know it. So whenever I have that, which is pretty often, there's usually not a fiduciary. A fiduciary would be an attorney that was assigned to sell the property. Then that attorney would not have to provide a seller's disclosure. But if there is the need for seller's disclosure because it is an estate and the executor of the estate is going to receive benefit, then I have them draw a line from corner to corner, and I have them handwrite on the seller's disclosure that they've never lived in the property. They are unfamiliar with the property and the material facts about the property until we get to those portions where they are familiar with that. So like in one case, we had one where we replaced the carpet, we replaced the flooring, we did all that. So we made notes in the seller's disclosure that we had done these things. Or if the roof got replaced during the fact that the decedent passed away and the executor of the estate, the house needed a new roof from a hailstorm, and then we went ahead and replaced the roof, and then we could disclose that it had a new roof and provide evidence of the new roof during the time that the executor was in control of the estate. Okay, so you want to make sure facts that they know are on there. That's what I do. Something else that happened not too long ago, I had an experienced agent in our office call me and say, we were getting the house ready and it needed interior repairs, and the foundation company hired, their people to go under the house and secure the interior piers. And the tunnel collapsed and Pedro passed away under the house. That's a horrible thing to have happen. But she said, do I have to disclose that? I said, well, there's 2 schools of thought. Nope, you don't have to if you don't want to. However, you're liable for whatever might happen afterwards. What do you mean? Well, let's say that person is a very religious person and they are afraid of ghosts and so forth. And the next thing you know, as soon as they close on it, here comes the neighbor, knock, knock, knock. Did you know Pedro died under your house 3 weeks ago? Oh my stars. Or a month ago or 6 weeks ago. And then they're afraid that they're going to get a ghost in their house. You don't want that problem. And you think that that can't happen, right? New York State, one of the biggest lawsuits ever. The seller advertised that they had a friendly ghost in the attic. And the buyer bought the house and said, the ghost is not friendly. And you said it was friendly. So I'm suing you. Crazy stuff like that does happen. Okay. All right. I think that's enough about seller's disclosures. Make sure that you let people in when you're contracted. Make sure your seller is prepared. They accept the property as is the box you would prefer to have checked. Buyer accepts property as is, except at seller's expense shall. Okay, this would be repairs and treatments prior to closing, in addition to any repairs and treatments that you might ask for or negotiate during the option period. Okay, so Give you an example, FHA loan, all windows and doors must function as designed. If you have a cracked window, that window will not pass the appraisal process. So you might put in there, replace cracked window in front of house, you know, in front of the living room or something like that. Pretty much you want a clean contract. I would say let's address it at the time of option period. Let's get contracted first. We used to write in there all the time that the house will be professionally cleaned at least 3 days prior to closing. And we got away with it because it was such a strong buyer's market. I don't know that you could get away with that today. Completion of repairs and treatments unless otherwise agreed to in writing. Seller shall complete all repairs and treatments prior to the closing date. Seller shall provide a buyer with copies of documentation of the repair persons showing the scope of work, concern, cause, correction. That's where this comes in. This phrase was never in the old contract. So as a seller, is your seller going to just open their checkbook and say, yeah, those 1990 air conditioners sitting out there, and yeah, we're in 2023. I've been nursing them along and they still cool the house. And all of a sudden, all three of them need to be replaced. They're not going to open their checkbook for, you know, $30,000 worth of air conditioners like my house needs. So you're probably going to, like we did in the olden days, back when we rode dinosaurs to the showings, we put a dollar amount that the seller would be responsible up to $2,000. Okay, so that's all coming out. We haven't seen the impact of this statement yet. I put it up on Facebook in our office about how important this was in the scope of work being explained. Buyer may exercise remedies under paragraph 15 if the scope of work is not on the invoices, paid invoices. They have to be paid and they have to show scope of work. Residential service contracts. Notice we're getting away from the word home warranty because it never was a warranty. The only people that can warranty anything are the ones that built it. Same with automobiles, same with houses. The builder can warranty, but the rest of us are residential service contracts. And it won't exceed so much money, and they have gone up in price. So to put $600 there is probably not a bad number. All right, brokers and sales agents. I disclose here, it says that if they're a spouse, a parent, or a child, or own more than 10% of a business that's buying the property, I disclose it here. I don't want there to be an argument later that you failed to disclose that you own 10% of that LLC that was buying that house. I don't want that problem. I helped my godson buy a house in Garland, millennial. I had a hard time convincing him it was the right thing to do. And finally, I stopped him in his tracks one day and I said, Andrew, you know, I love you. I've known you since the day you were born. And I want to ask a question. And, you know, they read everything, by the way. I said, does your rent go up every year? Yeah, it goes up every year. I said, when you get a mortgage, your mortgage is going to stay the same for 30 years if you stay that long. It will not go up. Now your taxes and insurance will increase, but you're gaining equity. So when you sell your house, you're going to get all your equity back if it's in a market where you can sell it for that price. And that made sense to him. So what did he do? He bought the house. He and his dad remodeled that house. And then he moved his 3 roommates in, so they're paying the mortgage. Oh, smart kid. All right. So I disclose that it's my godson right there. Closing date. Make sure that the other agent agrees with the closing date that you come up with, because there are people that travel. There are people that, you know, they can, you know, days of the week work better than others. And so here's the days you never want to close: the day before or after a holiday. I don't close on Mondays or Fridays, and I never close on the last day of the month. So Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays are the days I like to close, and we're not in the last day of the month, and we're not near a holiday. My closings go a whole lot better because of that. And funding does too. So here's the buyer. And although you tell them, do not show up to the closing with the moving van parked behind you. They do it anyway. Next thing you know, you're not fund. You close on Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock and it doesn't fund because the Fed didn't get it processed. And they don't get their keys until Monday. Well, that can be, you know, that's 3 days of storage or 4 days of storage for the moving van. And then the buyer has to go get a hotel room for 3 or 4 days. That's not what you want. Seller shall execute and deliver a general warranty deed. Okay, read that carefully. General warranty deed. If there's a divorce or an estate or whatever, it's going to be a special warranty deed and not a general warranty deed. However, the title company can still indemnify it. However, if the seller can't deliver, then, and the buyer wants out, that might be a way out. I'm not an attorney, can't practice law. Buyer shall pay the sales price and goods funds to the escrow agent, acceptable to the escrow agent. Buyer shall change in the contract, transfer any warranties. The seller shall transfer any warranties. When you have a new house and the windows are guaranteed to the first purchaser of that house. So if that first purchaser has a window warranty on that house, it will not transfer to the next buyer. So make sure you explain that to your seller and your buyer at the time. And the buyer may want compensation because that window warranty won't transfer. Could happen. Transfer fees assessed by a property owners association are governed by the addendum for the property subject to mandatory membership in an owners association. Private transfer fees. There's three. There's a HOA in Houston that charges a private transfer fee. There's Castle Hills, and there's also Lantana. Those three were grandfathered in. They changed the law to where they cannot establish more private entities to collect a fee. Buyer's possession, seller shall deliver to buyer. And then upon closing and funding, according to a temporary lease, do not ever give a buyer a temporary lease. I've seen them move in early and demo the kitchen, and then they don't close. I've seen them move in early and then they say, I don't like the house after all, I'm not going to close. And then what has to happen? You have to evict them. That's not good if they won't leave. Smart devices, we talked about those. Make sure that the smart devices, the passwords are dumbed down to a simple password, and that the buyer can walk into the house and change everything into their own passwords, and the seller won't have any more access to the cameras or any of the other operational devices in the house. Special provisions. Real Estate Commission got really serious about this. They didn't used to say this paragraph is intended to be used only for additional informational items. For informational item is a statement that it completes a blank in the contract form, discloses factual information as provides instructions. Real estate brokers and sales agents, that means brokers, even me, broker, are not permitted from are prohibited from practicing law, and shall not add to, delete, or modify any provision in this contract unless drafted by a party to the contract. That would be buyer or seller, or the party's attorney. So that means you need to stay out of it. And then, so you say, okay, so you have your client call the title company. They can't do it either. They represent the title company in the transaction, and they cannot give your client verbiage to put in special provisions. Your buyer or seller needs to find their own attorney. Texas Realtors has made a determination that if you recommend an attorney to that buyer or seller, and they don't get the results they want, then that buyer or seller client can come back and sue you for the recommendation. So you do not recommend attorneys. You could send them a list. Here's a list of people that I know that practice in the area. You can also look in the phone book or Google or whatever. Phone book. Boy, am I ever old. You can look on Google. You can try and find another attorney, but I can't recommend an attorney. All right. Seller shall pay an amount not to exceed. So usually what I do in repairs and have been doing for a while is we're going to have seller pays now. We're going to have the seller pay part of the closing costs for the buyer instead of doing repairs. Let the buyer do their own repairs. And so usually this used to be up to a 6% amount of the mortgage. Well, that's kind of gone by the wayside a little bit in that, because if you've got a VA or a FHA, you might have an issue with the fact that there's more risk involved if the buyer doesn't have any skin in the game. So if it is an FHA buyer that's barely qualifying for the mortgage, then the lender may say, yeah, you can't do 6% on this one. We'll let you do 4, or we'll let you do 3. Okay. So make sure you contact the lender before you put a number in there. Prorations. Everything's going to be prorated. Buyer shall pay taxes for the current year, casualty and loss. There's a hailstorm during the contract period. Let me just give you a little advice on this one. Let's see what time is it. It's 12:10, so we're already through over an hour of this. We're going to have to start rushing through this. But if you have a hailstorm while you're under contract, call a licensed roofer that will go out and take pictures and document with timestamp photographs that the roof was inspected and it either needs to be repaired or it doesn't need to be repaired because of hail damage. All right. Because what's going to happen is the underwriter for the mortgage has these hailstorm maps. And if your property was in a hailstorm area, they're going to say, we need to have an inspector go out and inspect the roof, and that will be at the expense of the buyer. And the lender will hire that, or the buyer may have to hire that inspector to go out and inspect the roof. That's why I'm proactive. If there's a hailstorm, the next day I get a roofer out there that's licensed and can provide adequate documentation and photographs of the roof. That way it does not hiccup the closing. All right, default, mediation, these aren't blank, so we're not going to run through them. All right, notices, buyer ad. So if you got the buyer, I make sure that the phone number for both buyers is here. Okay, because the title company needs to call them. Emails, I make sure that the emails are there. And then now thank goodness they came out with this, and a copy to buyer's agent at, and that is not supposed to be the address of your office. That is supposed to be your email. Okay. And then seller ad. So I make sure if I've got a buyer that I get these listing agents to please put their contact information for their client in these blanks and and I go ahead and I add the seller agent's email address here. I fill out everything that I can. Now, for compliance sake, and you want to get paid, how many want to get paid? I want to get paid. All right. I at least put the property address here if I've got a buyer. Okay. I at least do that. Reason being is if you don't have anything over here, if it's all blank, well, the compliance is going to flag that file until that gets filled in. Agreement of the parties. So it could be third-party financing, seller's temporary residential lease, could be a number of things. Make sure you add these. Okay. Consultant attorney. Oh, so let me ask you, let me help you with this. So remember on page 1 where it said third-party financing? And here it asks you the same question again, kind of redundant, huh? And so you forget to check the box on page 1, but you check the box here in the agreement of parties. So that question came up at a TREC meeting I was at several years ago, and they said, well, who is it still in effect or not? And they said this, the attorney for TREC said this, it'll be up to a jury. Finally, it will be up to a jury. So if your contract gets a checkbox missing, you do not go back and fill in a checkbox on an executed contract. Once a contract is executed, it is locked. You can't change anything. You must correct it with an amendment. So as soon as you realize that there's a mistake made or something needs to change, you need to draw an amendment to fix those things that need to be changed. I had a listing agent one time that insisted on rewriting the offer, and it was full of mistakes. And I told my buyer, I said, we're going to go ahead and execute it because we don't want another offer to slip in and take our deal. And we executed it, and I immediately drew an amendment that had 6 items on there to fix. And we had everybody sign the amendment to the contract. Does that make sense? We did not hold up execution. Here's what happened to my bride, who is also a broker. The listing agent said, well, you need to change this on the contract, and then we'll execute it. Verbiage is nothing. There's a phone call. And so during the time that she was getting those things, that one thing taken care of, somebody else made a bigger offer and they executed it. Was there anything wrong with that? No, there wasn't. Did my wife's client lose out on that property? Yes, they did. My wife has red hair. And she's got the attitude that goes with it. It was a fun few minutes for me at the house. I will tell you that. Consultant attorney before signing. Critical TREC rules prohibit real estate brokers and sales agents from giving legal advice. Read this contract carefully. Everybody good with all of that? And then the execution date. Do not fail to put the execution date there. It used to be really horrible. We used to get like 30–40% of the contracts would come in with no execution date. Do you still have a contract? Buyer and seller and acting in good faith. But what you've done is you have messed, I was going to use a different word, but I'm not allowed to. But you have messed up the timeline of the contract if you don't put an execution date there, okay? And then for the love of contracts, somebody says, what's your drug of choice? Mine is executed contracts. Okay. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that you fill this in properly. You check the right box. Buyer's agent as buyer only as buyer's agent, seller only as seller's agent. If you check this box as intermediary, the buyer's agent does not go on the left column. It goes underneath selling associate's name, and then make sure you add the addendum for intermediary to the contract. And that would be over in paragraph 22. Okay. Here's one of my favorite things, and that was the contract used to. So you know an agent's been an agent for a long time, or they were trained by somebody that's been an agent for a long time, and they just put 3% there. And then let's say MLS says 3%. It does mention in this paragraph that other documents control the commission. Totally agree with that. So 3% of what? It used to say of sale price. It doesn't say that anymore. So be professional, 3% of final sale price. Okay, or 2% of final sale price, whatever the commission might be. And this is the receipted page. This is what the title company fills in. Okay. So I had an agent love her to death. And she said, it's already filled in. The buyer's agent filled it in, that it said receipt of so much money. I said, no, that's a form fill. So they put the amount of money until the title company actually fills this in with the agent and the escrow agent and all that and the address. It's not been receipted in. And she thought, well, this meant that it had been receipted in. No, it's a form fill. Okay, third-party financing. Y'all want to take a break for a minute? Okay, let's it's 12:16 at 12:23. Let's come back. Can we do a 5-minute break? All
Sounds
right.
good. Thanks, Charles.
Yep, I'll be here for you in 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever. Wait another minute. So as you can see, what we do is not, Zillow and Open Door and OfferPad. They try and make everything sound easy. In reality, nothing what we do is easy. There's a great amount of knowledge that is needed to properly carry a client through the contract. And I take that to heart. I want to make sure that I treat all my clients like they were my favorite family member. I used to just say family member, but then I realized that there's families that are estranged. So I want to make sure that I treat them like a favorite family member. It's important to me. Fortunately, I've been doing this long enough, and everybody got that type of treatment. And they say, well, what about your listing presentation? Most of the time they call me and say, we need to list the house, and I get the particulars, and I don't have to do a presentation. So that's me. I'm fortunate. In fact, somebody wanted the 12 steps or 14 or 15 steps that I use when I make a business. I don't do a 2-hour presentation because it just wastes time by, their client's time, your time. And so what I have is a 15-point listing business plan. It's a business proposal is what it is. In reality, that's what it is. You're dealing with their most expensive asset in a lot of cases. And they said, I'd like to have that. And I had to pull it up. And I remembered that the last time I had to use it was like 3 years ago. So, and I mean, I've done some really monster big listings here lately. So it's really been good to have that kind of trust from the clients that know me. And so if you practice at an upper level, they're going to know it. I just did a lease for a repeat lease client, and she sent me a $100 Starbucks card. And her statement was, "You're the best agent ever." And that's, if you can hold yourself to that level and deliver that level of service, those people will never forget you. My wife and I have an argument about closing gifts. I said, their gift is the extensive amount of work that we do that other agents don't do. And they recognize it and they see it and they'll come back. Well, there was one where she insisted on buying them a closing gift. And they got divorced, and they used her agent, the seller's, her agent, which wasn't our agent because we came from by way of the ex-husband. And so it wound up being a deal that we didn't get. I said, so how much did that doormat and little statue get you? And so my wife and I do lock horns every once in a while, but I want to tell you that I have recently, after 32 years of marriage, come to a new level of understanding. And she is not a critical wife. She just tells me how it is. And it's so appreciated. It has brought our relationship up another level, which it was good to start with, but now I understand where she's coming from. Okay, are we ready to roll? Third party. Street address and city, type of financing to apply and obtain, type of finance and duty to apply and obtain approval. Buyer shall apply promptly for all financing. Well, my people have already been applied for and they're already accounted for and they're ready to go. Describe below and make every reasonable effort. If you can't provide me an approval letter for that client that I can verify, no matter what level of letter you have. So let's talk about the 3 levels of letters. One they call a pre-qualification. Well, that was pretty much a phone call and a credit pull. That does not even establish debt to income ratio. That letter to me is almost as good as toilet tissue, okay? Almost as good. And then you have the lender that has run them through DU, Desktop Underwriter, which is a program that they've had to provide some information, maybe not all, but they've had to provide some information. And so I'll take a DU over a pre-qual any day. And then there's what they call the conditionally approved letter. And there's a lot of lenders that will not offer that letter, but they've done the work. And so that's why you want to have conversation with that lender. I do not let a contract get executed that I have not talked to the lender. And so if the lenders are hard to reach, then guess what? Maybe your client doesn't get that contract because I couldn't find them. They didn't answer the call. I called them yesterday and here we are the next day and we still haven't heard from them. I got 2 other offers on the table. We're going to go with somebody I can talk to. Very important to make sure that you establish the ability of the buyer to buy. And by the way, if they're a cash buyer and they provide a bank statement as proof of funds, that is just as good as toilet tissue because you cannot verify it. What you need is a letter from the asset holder, verifiable, that you can call and a manager for that company, whether it's a bank or a Fidelity or whatever, that you can actually reach out to and find out that they indeed do have the money on tap for that. And believe me, during this last summer when things were hot, when people were, executing contracts without doing all that work, and then you find out that the letter they gave you was fake, and that buyer really can't buy, and they're just a sociopath, narcissistic person that's out there trying to weasel into a contract that they can't get closed. You think that happens? Raise your hand if you think so. Raise your hand if it happened to you. It's happened to me. Buyer had and verifiable proof and actually provided it and then found out he was a fake buyer. Okay. Type of financing. So they shall apply for it promptly, including but not limited to furnishing all information documents to the buyer's lender. Conventional financing, that's our favorite almost. And I like it better than cash because cash buyers are kind of my way or the highway, and conventional financing means they've gone through the effort and commitment to get mortgage. And because they've gone through that effort and commitment, that usually means they're a stronger buyer than a cash buyer, in my opinion. My humble but accurate opinion. Okay, the first mortgage loan, pretty much that's all we're seeing anymore are 1 loan. So in the amount of, so what is that? That is not the sale price. That's the amount in the finance line. Line B on page 1, paragraph 3, including any finance PMI premium due in full, and usually it's 30 years. Some people will do 20. All my mortgages in my life have always been 20 except for one. In interest not to exceed whatever. So people thought they were so smart. And remember I talked about a contract being in default when you executed it. So we know the interest rates are over 6 right now. And so somebody being really smart would put 5.9% in there. Well, their buyer cannot qualify for 5.9% because it's not available without buying points, right? And so that number needs to be above whatever the par rate is. Par rate, what's that? That's the best rate and anybody can get on a 30-year mortgage. So let's say par rate is 6.25%. I'm going to put for my buyer and I'm going to check and make sure that they are qualified at that rate. And then I'm going to put 6.75 in there. That's a 0.5 point higher. Why am I doing that? If you execute that contract on Friday afternoon, the lender, in most cases, they do have some product out there where they can do shop and lock and shop, but they can't lock a rate until they have an executed contract in their hand, which happens to be Monday. And Monday, the rates come out at 10 o'clock and they've gone up a quarter point. Right? So you want to make sure that you have a cushion there. So if the letter says that they're going to qualify at 6%, I want to put 6.5% here. Okay, everybody good with that? In full in 30 years, annual premium for the first 30 years, the loan origination charges as shown on the buyer's loan estimate for the loan not to exceed. Okay, conventional loans, you can get a conventional loan for 1% of the cost of the origination fee of the cost of the mortgage. Okay, so that's 1%. When you get down here to VA and you get to FHA, it's 2%. So make sure you put 2% in there on FHA and VA. Everybody good with that? Okay. We haven't seen second mortgage loans in forever. I don't expect to see them coming back. They were problematic. There were a lot of defaults and foreclosures on 2 mortgage buyers. So that's kind of frowned upon anymore, unless you get up into the jumbo range. You get up in the jumbo range, they might want to split it an 80-20, which they can still do. And they want to, what they're trying to do is avoid the jumbo rate mortgage rate, which right now currently is actually not too bad. So you're probably not going to see it there either. Texas Veterans Loan. I know they have a spot in there for it, and I love veterans. Don't get me wrong, but I have never done one of them, never worked with it. FHA, we've done a lot of those. Section A section. And if it's a regular property, meaning it's a house ready for retail, not a rehab, that's going to be a 203B loan every time. If it's a rehab loan, which by the way, I've never done any of them because they're such a difficult loan to work with, 203K if it's a rehab loan or a loan where the house needs foundation work, seller's not going to do it. The buyer's going to do it after closing, but then the property has to appraise for that amount with the foundation fixed. And so that means it's probably going to have to appraise for more than what the contract is for. So those can be problematic. So you want to make sure you're not working with 203K unless you're getting a lot of help from the lender and somebody in your office or me or somebody. All right. So it's 203B insured loan, not less than, then the loan amount is going to be so much, right? Make sure you put the loan amount, not the sale amount in there. Amortized monthly for not less than 30 years, in most cases with interest not to exceed. There again, you make sure you put that cushion per annum for the, not to exceed, yeah. And then the amount of the loan is going to be 2% in this block right here. So not to exceed, there again, 6.5% per annum for the first 30 years of the loan with origination charges as shown. Buyer's loan estimate for the loan shall not to exceed 2% of the loan. You'll never get one with 1%. There again, if you put your client default as soon as you execute, if you put 1% there, yes, you have, because they can't qualify. Now, here's where your hard money loan comes in. Other financing, a loan that is not type described above from ABC portfolio lenders.com or whoever, and the principal amount of and due in so many years, and the interest rate's going to be in there as well. They did not have that in the old third-party form. Buyer approval, check this box. This contract is subject to the buyer obtaining buyer approval. If buyer cannot obtain buyer approval, buyer may give written notice to the seller within. Now, a lot of people teach 21 days. It's going to take 21 days. Well, if my offer says 10 days and your offer says 21 days, whose offer is stronger? If my offer says 7 days, it's really strong, right? But remember, my buyer's already been through underwriting and the stipulations have already been satisfied. What is a stip? Okay, I'm going to give you a great example of what a stip is, and then we're going to have to hurry through there. When Linda and I refinanced our house, when the interest rates dropped down to 2.85, I got a text from the processor, and I knew her quite well. And she sends me a text saying, you made a cash deposit in July of over $700. What was that for? I texted her back, drug deal went well. And she said, very funny, but I need to know. And so I said, we took Linda's mother, who had turned 80, to a restaurant. People flew from around the world, literally around the world. She was military. Her husband was military. And they came to the restaurant. We rented the room and they paid us cash and we deposited the cash. And so we had to write a letter of explanation. It was a stipulation. Had to write a letter of explanation, provide them the credit card receipt, and they already had the receipt from the bank statement. And so they had to prove everything out. Used to be they would look in your wallet, look in your purse and say you're qualified for the mortgage. Now they dump everything out on the table and they look at it with a magnifying glass. They're looking for drug money. They're looking for money laundering, and they're looking for a lot of other things in qualifying the buyer. And the mortgage company and the title company both do it. Okay. You can check this box in this hot market we had last summer. This contract is not subject to obtaining buyer approval because we already have it. Then we would check that box as well. Now I'm more inclined to let them, because they may have to refresh the file. That's why I want to put 7 days here. Okay, refreshing the file means new bank statements. That means pulling the credit again. And if they bought the Mercedes from the time that you started until the time you got contracted, guess what? Their file has to go back through underwriting. So that's why you want 7. How long is underwriting? If it's truly in underwriting and not waiting to go in underwriting, it's usually 48 hours. Okay. What do you mean by waiting to go into underwriting? Well, it's in a stack of files. It's waiting to get to the underwriter. And that might take 3 days and back in the rush. Now, today's market and environment, no, it will not take 3 days. That's a change in the contract, letting the buyer know that there's going to be a lien on the deed. All right, that's third party. Any questions about third party financing? Everybody good with that? All right. Amendment for property subject to mandatory membership in a property owners association. One of the big things you need to know. Well, I'm going to back up on third party. I'm going to go right back to it. Remember when I said there are 2 things that need to qualify for the mortgage? One is the buyer and the other is the property. And if for some reason the appraiser calls something out that needs to be repaired after investigation, the lender does not have to do that repair and the deal will fall apart and the buyer will get their earnest money back because they don't have to pay for lender required repairs. Okay. So there's 2 things that must qualify. So they have up until 3 days before closing to give notice that the property doesn't pass the appraisal process. But whatever you check for the number of days, or if you check that this contract is not subject, then those are the number of days that the buyer has to qualify. So here's what can happen and has happened in the past. Buyer loses their job 2 days before closing. Their mortgage is not going to get qualified. Who gets the earnest money? Come on, guys. Hello. Am I that good or are you guys sleeping?
No, just takes me a minute to get off mute.
Okay. All right. So who gets earnest money?
If the buyer loses their job 2
Buyer
days
loses
before
their
closing,
job the day before closing. The buyer is now not qualified, but you gave them a number of days to be qualified, or you check the box that says they don't need to be, then the seller would get the earnest money. Whenever I take a listing, every single time I tell the seller, look, earnest money is something that most of the time is rightfully going to go back to the buyer. Go ahead and give it back no matter what. No matter what, because you don't want that problem. So then the buyer gets mad and says, you know what? It wasn't my fault I lost the job, although they were written up 4 times for something. It wasn't my fault, and I'm mad that you're keeping that earnest money, so I'm going to have an attorney file a lien on your property. It's called a lis pendens. Rightfully applied or wrongfully applied, that will stop a sale in the future. So you don't want that to have happened. So I tell my sellers, give back the earnest money no matter what. I actually had a buyer that did lose her job. I had the listing. And we went to the backup contract, which was $25,000 more. And there was only like $12,000 worth of earnest money. I said, you're going to get your money back plus make an extra 12. He was happy. So we sold the property to the backup contract. All right, authorization to release information. If you have a cash buyer and you want to be in compliance, there's a TILA release of information that state of Texas has written, and it is a form. All right, this is a laughable form in my opinion, and the opinion of several attorneys, because the law that says that they can't disclose to you what the buyer and seller are going to have on the closing statement is a federal law. Who overrides federal? State is federal. And so Texas went, we're Texas, we're going to go ahead and write us a form. And so they write up that form that says the title company is going to release the information to the agents so that they can have that. Well, the title companies have their own form that gets signed at closing. If you've ever been to a closing that you go through the whole form stack, and it's a form at the very end that my title company that I like to use is saying this, sign this so that the listing and the buyer's agent can have the copy of the closing statement because they need to close their file. And not only that, I want to check it to make sure it was right. You know, not very often do I find a mistake on a closing statement, but it happens from time to time. Okay, so anyhow, so they released, so they're allowed to release it to that, to the buyer and seller's agents. Seller and buyer authorized, seller, buyer's lender. So this is already written in third party, but if it's a cash deal, there's a separate form with this language in it. Okay. All right. So what you need to know about the mandatory membership in a property owner association is this. The top of this form is the agreement of buyer and seller, 1, 2, 3, and 4, as to who's going to be responsible for supplying the documents or pay for the documents. And down here at the bottom, the title company, from here down is where the title company is acting as the agent for the party that is responsible for paying for the documents. Okay, so it's a two-phase document. My closing manager is an attorney. She hates this form. She said it should have been two separate forms because it's all on the one and it gets confusing to a buyer or seller. So just make sure that you can explain to your client. Top part is your agreement between the other party, and the bottom part is the title company acting as the agent. Act on behalf of the parties to obtain subdivision information only upon receipt of the requested fee for the subdivision information from the party obligated to pay. So let's say box 1 is checked. How many days legally do they have to respond and give you documentation? It's 15 days. However, I don't put 15 days there because that's the HOA providing the title company the documentation. And let's say they do that on Friday afternoon at 4:30 and the title company goes home, and then Monday is when they deliver it to the client. So there's 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 days, right? So I still like putting 20 days, 18 to 20 days in there. And if you're doing a deal out in some of these communities, senior communities, everything slows down with them. You can't get HOA documents from Robes and Ranch in 20 days. So I put 22 or 23 days there. Okay, just saying. So within so many days that the seller shall obtain, pay for, and deliver. Box number 2, buyer shall obtain, pay for, and deliver a copy to the seller. Number 3, buyer has received the approved subdivision information. And in our hot market, we did have listing agents that obtained the HOA documents and resale certificate prior to contract. Now that in a buyer's market where things are going to extend out, that resale certificate is only good for 90 days. So if it takes you 100 days to get a contract, then guess what? Somebody's got to pay all over again. Now, I'm sure there's some lenience there, but in this market, I don't put here that the buyer has received the information. As a listing agent, I'm not going to tell my seller to get the information already. Buyer does not require delivery of the subdivision information. In the hot market we were in, we were checking that box, but guess what? The title company still has to have it. So the onus was put on the buyer to obtain and pay for that documentation and get it to the title company. All right. But what that did was, making a stronger offer, it erased the 3 days after the buyer receives the subdivision information. Buyer may terminate this contract within 3 days after buyer receives the subdivision information. It removes that 3 days. So it removes another out for the buyer. So can you see how that offer was stronger than the one that says, hey, they've got 3 days to terminate after they get the HOA documents? All right, so very simple deal. We were checking this box number here. And by the way, it doesn't have to be an HOA reason. It could be any reason. It could be the husband and wife decided to get divorced during the contract. They terminate during this time. So if you're going to use this termination point and you know that you are, go, and I've done this once. I go ahead and I call the listing agent, hey, we're going to go ahead and terminate when we get the HOA documents. But if your seller will go ahead and terminate and release the earnest money back to the buyer, then we'll go ahead and let you get it back on the market today instead of waiting another 12 days or 10 days or whatever. Okay, can you see how that benefits the seller? And it benefits the listing agent, and you've helped them out if you've got the buyer that's going to terminate anyway. You get one reputation in this business, and if you're known as somebody that helps get the transaction to the closing table, or you help out the agent by getting the house back on the market, that is huge.
So
Elizabeth?
if you tell them beforehand that you're going to terminate even before you get the subdivision information,
Mhm.
are you terminating because of the subdivision information?
That's right. It
Okay.
doesn't say you have to have the documents in hand to use that reason.
Okay, and you don't have to have a why? You just say I'm terminating because of subdivision information?
We're going to
Okay.
terminate. Okay. You don't have to have a why. Okay, and even under number 2, if the buyer obtains, they still have 3 days to terminate the contract. Wow. What if you put down here 10 days and the buyer's going to buy and shall deliver to the, because it says shall, buyer shall obtain, pay for, and deliver. So you'd say oh, we'll get it in 10 days, and you even pay the rush fee and you still don't have them in 10 days. Is the buyer in default? Yep. Can the seller terminate the contract? Yep. See how important that little word shall is? All right. Title company or its agent is authorized to act on behalf of the parties to obtain the information only upon receipt of the required information by the party that's supposed to pay. So material changes. If something changes in the HOA, like they get the seller gets notice that there's an assessment coming, they need to give notice of that. Fees and deposits for reserves, seller shall pay any associated fees, deposits, reserves, and any other charges associated with transfer of the property not to exceed. You got to be very careful, especially in some of these newer subdivisions, like out in Pecan out here over in part of Denton County. It's a newer subdivision. The transfer fee is $1,500. And you need to know that, because if you put down here like $350 transfer fee, oh, great. Well, there's a transfer fee out in Pecan that's $1,500. And guess who has to pay the excess? The seller. So like in Ropes and Ranch, there's a purchase into the HOA membership club. It's $3,200 right now, from what I understand. That number needs to be there plus any transfer fees. So I've add 350 to 3,200, and I got 3,550 in there that the buyer's going to be responsible for. Okay, everybody good with that? Okay, great. Authorization. Seller authorizes the association to release and provide the information because the seller is the one that has the agreement with the HOA. Information and any updated resale certificate if requested by the buyer, the title company, or broker of this sale. If buyer does not require the subdivision information or an updated resale certificate, the title company requires information from the association, such as status of dues, special assessments, violations of covenants and restrictions, and information prior to the title company ordering the information. So who's going to pay, the buyer or the seller? Well, if you check box 1, make sure you check seller box down here, because the seller says on the top part of the form, seller's going to obtain and pay for. You need to make sure it matches down here. If you check box 2, make sure you check the buyer box. Most title companies are going to call the, call the client that's obligated to pay and ask for their credit card number. Hopefully it's not done in an email. And by the way, every title company needs information and social security numbers from your client. I tell my clients and the title companies I run with, no, do not send that document to my client. You will call them, and the phone number is in paragraph 21. You will call them and get that information over the phone. Why? Because wire fraud is real. It's a $1 billion a year industry. When it started, it was only $1 million a year industry. And they know how to steal your people's money. And it's through emails that they've hacked either you as the agent, They've hacked even the title company. Oh, we're secure. No, you're not. Or they've hacked into your client's email and they know what's going on. So I don't let them email that information back and forth. And if the title company wants it on a form, I'll let them send the blank form and I will then pick it up and I will hand deliver it to the title company. I will not scan it and email it. Addendum concerning right to terminate due to lender's appraisal. Okay, that was a pretty common form that we used last summer. I called box 1 the idiot box. You'd have to be an idiot to say you're going to pay whatever it appraises for, plus whatever. But that was the box that got contracts executed. And I had that same conversation with my buyer. Realize that if it appraises for, and that's where you need to be a sharp agent, do a good market study. Do a good market study. And if the market's going up, add that to the amount you think it's going to appraise for, although we can't talk about value. We can only talk about market activity and a market study. Valuation is done by an appraiser, not us. So I would come up with a good market study and I would let them know what I thought and how much cash they're going to need. And I would get them with their lender if they were getting a mortgage, if it wasn't cash. And I would have the lender to work up a worksheet that had that amount of money in there that they were going to have to pay over so that they knew what their obligations were during the time of contract, during option period. So if they needed to terminate, they could. All right. Buyer waives the right to terminate the contract. Partial waiver. Okay, I'll buy this $600,000 property and I'll pay $650 for it or $680 for it or $690, or I'll pay $700. But it must appraise for at least the 600. Okay, so that's where you would put the minimum amount that it has to appraise for. And then we have what I called the "this will never get bought" box last summer, and that is it must appraise for the contracted sale amount. If you filled that one out, you are not going to get your contract accepted. But let's talk about this line because we're getting back into a buyer's market. Buyer may terminate this contract within so many days after the effective date if, so you got to count from the effective date. How long is it going to take to get that appraisal? And then I would add like 7 days to it if you could. And I would get that appraisal ordered right after execution. I still do that today. Because if there's going to be a problem, I want to know early. I don't want to find out day before closing that it didn't appraise. Do you? Neither does the seller and neither does the buyer. So let's get it ordered. And yes, there's a cost to it. And appraisals are running $500, $600, $700. It is what it is. All
So
right. So,
one question.
yeah.
Doesn't the lender order the appraisal or?
The lender orders the appraisal. That is correct. So I have my buyer tell the lender to order the appraisal.
Okay,
I follow up with the lender. Great question. Is the appraisal been ordered? Has it been ordered? Now, fortunately, my contract manager makes that call, but she'll let me know it's ordered or it's not ordered. Okay.
okay.
All right. The appraised value according to the appraisal obtained by the buyer's lender is less than this amount. Okay, buyer delivers a copy of the appraisal to the seller. So you actually, if you're going to use this box, you have to deliver a copy of the appraisal to the seller. Okay. And then you have the right to terminate. Buyer, if buyer terminates over this paragraph, the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. All right. Everybody good with that?
Do you use that document on every offer?
Nope. I don't use it anymore currently
Okay,
because the market's not that hot.
okay.
Last year, we did use that document when I had an off-market listing. This was a beautiful sale, by the way. Off-market listing. You go, why do people want it off-market? Well, people have reasons. Okay. Let's say they've got a special needs child and that special needs child, and autism is a horrible thing, but are people out there that have autistic children and they don't like their routine messed up. They don't like it changed during the day. And so, hey, I don't want all this showing stuff. I don't want this. Can you find me a buyer? Oh, last summer I could, right? So we worked it out. And this property, I could not make $675,000 for it. And then we had 3 people that approached me that said, we want this property. And I don't have time to go through the entire thing, but I called my seller back and I said, today's your lucky day. They're asking what it will take to keep it off the market. And I said, make sure you're happy with the number you give me because you're probably going to have to live with it. And she said, tell them to start in the 8s. Remember, I couldn't make 675 on this house. That was my top according to a market study. We sold it for 850. Think I had a happy seller? Whoa. All right. Now it was a beautiful house, totally remodeled, all the electronic gizmos ever. The vanity mirrors in the bathroom had 3 buttons, bright, medium, and off. I mean, this house was Google everything. It was gorgeous. Pool, everything new, all the appliances new, top grade appliance. It was great. It was wonderful. I love selling that house. Wish I could sell another 10 of those. Okay, so the amendment. So here's where you're going to amend, where maybe they come to an agreement if it's a cash buyer that there's a lot of repairs and the seller's willing to take a discount in the sale price, because paragraph 12(1)(b) is not going to really help a cash buyer, because the closing costs for a cash buyer are not that much. Your escrow fees and your fees for prorations and all, there's not that much money there. So maybe you have a price reduction, and here's where you would put that. In addition to any repairs and treatments otherwise required by the contract, seller at seller's expense shall, and we only got 4 minutes left, complete the following repairs and treatments. Notice paragraph 7 of the contract governs the completion, delivery, and documentation of the transfer of warranties of repairs to the treatments. The date, the paragraph 9 in the contract, so closing date would be changed. Had an agent call me today. We have an estate we're working with, and it's a nightmare. There's 4 different executors on this contract. Oh my gosh, I've been there. And she said, we have to get a sister to sign something, and she's out of pocket and whatever. Anyhow, so they, instead of being in default, they went ahead and extended the closing date. The amount of paragraph 12(1)(b) shall be changed to. So the buyer gets to do their own repairs, and you get an $8,000 or $12,000. I did one year that was $17,000 of seller paid. The cost of lender required repairs and treatments as itemized in the attached list will be paid as follows. So that would be lender required repairs. I've never used this line ever. Okay. Buyer has paid seller an additional option fee to extend the option. That means it is paid, not an imaginary dollar. I would say your minimum amount there needs to be at least 25. I had an agent the other day and said, well, we gave them 7 days for 700 and they want 5 more days. So we asked for another 500. That was good thinking on that listing agent's part. That's not a bad number to get for your seller. Typically I go for maybe a couple of $100 or $300 or $400. So you're trying to keep people happy. When people get unhappy in a deal, that's when things start to fall apart. Buyers paid for the additional option. So make sure the money is receipted. That, by the way, can be done with Zelle or Venmo or one of those programs. So you can send that money directly to the seller if they can accept it. Buyer waives the unrestricted right to terminate the contract for which the option fee was paid. I check that box frequently. Okay, these are the repairs and treatments that we want, and you're going to agree to it. And so therefore, we want to give your seller assurance that we're going to go to closing. So we're going to go ahead and check that box. Do you have a safety valve? Yeah, the HOA documents. The date for the buyer to give written notice to seller that they cannot attain buyer approval. So let's say you go through the 7 days and there's a hiccup. There's a stipulation that shows up. So we need to change that date to 15 days. So you're going to ask for another number, another date for the approval of the buyer to change. Other modifications, if you're going to write there, get with somebody. You can't practice law, so it's like special provisions. Make sure you just don't get creative in there and start changing terms in the contract. Or if terms in the contract are going to be changed, make sure that your client is telling you what to write in there through an email that you can prove later. Right? Consult an attorney before signing. TREC rules prohibit real estate brokers and sales agents from giving legal advice. Read this form carefully. We have 1 more minute and that's it. Okay, everybody happy? Okay, there is the scope of work that is going to become a huge issue in our industry. And so I have a class for that. It's not part of what I'm teaching here, but it will be part of what I teach in one of my 1-hour classes. So keep up with the Go calendar so that you can keep up with that. That's how big a deal that's going to be. Any questions about anything we talked about?
Yes.
Go ahead, Tanya.
Number 6, buyer has paid seller. The additional option fee will or will not be credited to the sale price. What is the ramification on either of those selections?
Well, either it will be credited on the closing statement or it won't be. Now, if I'm a listing agent and I'm telling you, you need to pay another $500 towards the option fee, then me as a buyer want that option fee credited at the time of closing. So then I would be, if I was a buyer, I would say, then yes, I want it to be credited to the sale price. It's a credit on the closing.
Okay.
statement. So if it's $50, maybe they don't care, right? So you bought the option to extend, but we're not going to give you credit for that option. There's another giant story that goes with that, but I'm not going to go into it.
Well, this is great. Thank you.
All right, Tanya, you good? Did I help
Yeah.
you? That's the question.
I don't have any questions. I was just going to say this has been very helpful. I'm going through coaching class right now where we're working on lots of contracts.
Right?
But we don't really have time to go through each contract, you know. So when we go to do our homework, I've had so many questions. So this helps a lot. Thank
Okay, so what market center are you in, Tanya?
you. Preston Road, Dallas
Okay.
Preston Road. Mhm.
And then they've got a great program. I know they do. What
do.
I have started doing, and I'm getting with Cinda, who's over Go Coaching. And what I am doing is I have a 2-hour session with my client, and your homework assignment might be different than ours, and probably is, because our coach here in the office, Vicki Christensen, she's the one that comes up with her homework assignment and say, on this listing, I want you to write an offer. And so what I do is I teach for 2 hours on Friday and 2 hours on Monday on their homework assignment, but I don't know that that's going to help you.
Yeah, do we have access to you on that?
Well, you're a paid coaching client, so let me get with Cinda on that. So I would
Okay.
say that you should be. It's the agents that aren't paying for coaching that should not have access to that. So since
Right.
you're paying for coaching, I think it would be a great idea. We need more participation. If you take a look at this class, and I'm grateful for every one of you that are
Oh,
showing up.
I wouldn't have missed it. So
Like,
do I need to follow up with her to see if I can get in your
I
class
will
or how I
follow
go
up
about
with
getting
her.
a link?
What I need you to do, Tanya, is take down my number and send me a text and your contact card. My cell number is 214-284-7136. Cinda's down in Houston teaching Bold this week, so I will pop her a text and make sure that other agents that are paying for coaching can attend. Okay?
Okay, and that was 214-284-7136.
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am. All right.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, Shelby, you're a hero in my world. Thank you for hosting this and making it all work. Everybody else good?
Thank you,
All right,
Charles,
I'm
for
going
your
to say
time.
goodbye.
Thanks,
Take care.
everyone.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good one.